we have the drama of Colin Kaepernick and what he was advocating for and so on and so forth. And we have the visceral, venomous reaction to his advocacy, to his activism, if you will. The problem that I have with it is not mere disagreement. Disagreement is natural. Politics, by its very nature, is divisive. So I'm not going to sort of peddle this sort of faux unity nonsense, because it is nonsense when you think about it. We're always going to be divided on any given issue. We might be united as human beings, for example, but we're going to be divided on any given issue. For example, who do you support, He-Man or Skeletor, to use a rather light example. And this is true for the Black Lives Matter movement. So there are two things that I want to tackle. Number one, the demonization of those that don't agree with you. And number two, arguing against reality, both of which the right are guilty of. So let's get into this. So the first thing is that under a liberal secular democracy and in the context of a pluralist society, things like defund the police, alternatives to policing, abolishing the death penalty, and so on and so forth, these are legitimate things to advocate for. Giving critiques of the police force, these are legitimate things to engage in, legitimate debates to be had, legitimate policies to advocate for. For example, a policy idea that I don't agree with, that is nonetheless perfectly legitimate in the context of a democracy to support and advocate for, is stricter gun laws. To even a total ban on the citizenry attaining guns. This is a perfectly legitimate thing to advocate for and has objective benefits. That's the other thing. What we disagree on is not whether or not said proposal has benefits, because each proposal does indeed have benefits, demonstrable benefits. What we disagree on is it worth the trade-offs that come with it? That is the nature of a democracy. So here's an example. Defund the police. That is a perfectly legitimate thing to advocate for, even if you disagree with it. That is something that demonstrably has benefits for the community at large. But where the debate arises, and where those of you that are on the right will disagree with it, is the notion, the idea, that it is not worth the trade-offs that come with it. So that's sort of how we must engage with things. There is a big difference between advocating for such measures that Colin Kaepernick advocated and advocates for, and, for example, a despicable organization that I'm not going to name that more or less wants to advocate or legalize what some ancient Greeks engaged in. I think you can guess what I'm talking about. A practice between men and boys. This is counter to a democracy. By its very nature, would undo the very system in which debate can occur. Okay, we're getting at Martha Karl Popper's notion of tolerance, that we reach a paradox when it comes to tolerance, that eventually we must not tolerate the intolerable. And so that would be an example for, right there, those advocating for such relations to be legalized. That is not a legitimate thing to advocate for, and would in fact bring about the destruction of society. This is not true for defund the police. Well, this is not true for stricter gun laws. You see, I gave two examples, one that I agree with, one that I don't. And so this bad faith approach, where it's the thinking is, because I disagree, therefore you must be evil, you must be extinguished, essentially. That is a terrible, terrible way to go about things, and the right in particular are very much guilty of this. That is the first point that I wanted to make. The second point that I wanted to make is arguing against reality. The current leader of the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I can't remember his name, Dallin Oaks, that's his name, before he became the leader, did a speech where he acknowledged the reality of institutional racism. Think about that. That the leader of what was once, objectively speaking, this is history, by the way, the most racist church in the entire world, has now come forward in support of what every sociologist, political science, social science, and so on and so forth, department, and so on and so forth, have been saying for decades now, which is that police brutality towards BIPOC men around the world is a reality. That institutional racism is a reality. Now, this is not a debate. The Candace Owens of the world, the Ben Shapiro's of the world, who, by the way, argues for the existence of institutional anti-Semitism, I might add, they don't have an excuse anymore. You don't get to dance on the graves of people like George Floyd, who was essentially unalived for having a counterfeit $20 note on him that he very much likely didn't even know was counterfeit to begin with. You don't get to dance on the graves of such people anymore and proclaim that you are sane or whatever. This is akin to arguing flat earth. That is what this is akin to. That you are arguing against reality, again, what the right seem to be very much guilty of. And it is a position of bad faith. It is to argue in bad faith. The debate should not be, does institutional racism exist? Because this is very much a real thing. The debate ought to be, does that explain supposedly higher crime rates amongst the X group? And that is where the real debate is. And what should or should not be done about it? Is diversity really a good thing? Or perhaps is merit the way to go about this? Is this a problem that we just simply have to live with until it dies on its own? Or should we actively take measures to get rid of it? These are the real debates that we should be having. Instead, those on the right continue to act in bad faith by arguing, first and foremost, that the other side is a demon because they disagree with them. And second of all, by arguing against reality. Again, this is akin to arguing that the earth is flat. It's silly. It's absolutely silly. And so that is my hope going forward, is that many, yes, there are those on the left that are guilty of this, but I think we have to be honest, it is for the most part a right-wing phenomenon, that they will demonize the other side unnecessarily, and that they will engage in bad faith arguments against already established facts. We do not need this. If we want progress, if we want things to move forward, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge the plurality of opinions that any democracy allows for. That's number one. And number two, we need to acknowledge mere reality itself.